Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Friends, our scheduled sutta for today is Nalakalapiya Sutta, or the Shields of Reeds from the Samyutta Nikaya. This deals with the Paticca Samuppada, or the dependent origination. As a preface to the sutta, I thought of giving an introductory explanation of the dependent origination today, so that when we study the sutta, that is the Nalakalapiya Sutta, you would understand it better, because there are differences in the Nalakalapiya Sutta, the way it is organized, right? So, Paticca Samuppada, or dependent origination, has 12 factors, where each factor arises by the support of the previous one. Paticca means because of or dependent upon. Dependent on this one comes up. Dependent on this, the next one comes up. It's like that. Samuppada means beginning or arising. So you can see why the translation is dependent origination, right? So origination means beginning or arising. It starts with ignorance. Paticca Samuppada, or dependent origination, starts with ignorance and ends with dukkha, or the mass of suffering. The Buddha calls it the mass of suffering. Dukkha khandas samudayo hoti. That's how it is given. It's the function of dependent origination is to continue suffering. You see? So, how this suffering continues from one life to the next life, and in the present life also, how we are suffering in different ways. It can be mental, it can be physical. So, that is what is found in the dependent origination. How it starts and how it comes about and how it arises, and also how we could end it. The looking closely at it, closely at this dependent origination, we can see that it is the personal experience of the human being in this world. That is what we find in the dependent origination, our own experience of suffering. Dependent origination is an extended version of the Four Noble Truths. You know the Four Noble Truths: suffering, cause of suffering, cessation of suffering, the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So these four are given in the dependent origination. It's given by way of origination, as now the origination part or the arising part is given as anuloma. Anuloma means how this cycle starts. This is not a linear one. It is a cycle. So how this cycle starts, the suffering cycle, how it starts is what is given in the dependent origination. And by way of cessation. That is called patiloma. Anuloma is the starting, patiloma is the stopping. And how to end it. This is what is given in the dependent origination. Dependent origination should not be thought as a strict sequence, as I told you. Not a strict sequence from one point to the other in one linear line, right? Starting from ignorance and ending with dukkha. It is not something like that. It is possible to look at it from any point in the series. In this round, you can look at it from one point, it will come back to that point again. So, because it is cyclic and not linear. Dependent origination shows the conditionality and dependent nature of all phenomena existing in the world and how they are conditionally related, though we use different terms like man, woman, animal, etc. But they are all connected. The word conditioned means that all things in the world are formed by a cause. Hetu. You see? Hetu. Hetu means there is a cause. There is a cause for what happens. Hetu, phala. Phala is the result. Hetu is the cause. So there is a cause for everything. Even in the smallest thing that happens, in the world, there is a cause. And then the result comes. They have all these conditioned things, all these things that have come due to a cause have three characteristics. What is that? Arising. Arising means starting. And that is called uppada. Uppada. Then it stays a while, just a, very small, very, very short time. It stays. But all the time it is changing. Even while we think it is staying there, it is changing. And that is called titi. Then it ceases. Ceases, that means bhanga. It stops, it finishes, ends. According to Buddhism, things are not due to one cause. Not due to one cause. If you look at your life, you will see that even what happens to your life is not due to one cause. The happenings, right? Experiences, they are due to different causes. So, they are not causeless also. There is always a cause. And there are many causes for whatever happens. For one thing to happen, many causes, not just one cause. In dependent origination, every effect becomes a cause, right? Now, when we start now we are still not at the dependent origination. So I'm explaining to you what dependent origination is. So in dependent origination, you will see that what causes the effect in the next factor, the effect becomes the cause, right? You wait and see. When we start, you will see that. The effect becomes a cause and it goes on as long as ignorance and craving remain. The whole world is subject to the law of cause and effect. So that is what we call karma, cause and effect. Let us now look at the 12 factors one by one. So now we will look at the 12 factors. So the first one starts like this. Avidya Pachya Sankhara. Avidya Pachya Sankhara. The meaning is dependent on ignorance, volitional formations arise. Now let us, see what it is, right? Ignorance is not knowing the enlightenment of the Buddha. I will not go into detail about these things because later I will do dependent origination in detail. But this is just an introduction for you to understand what it is, right? So therefore, I'm not going into details. Now, so one factor, one thing about ignorance is that people don't exactly know what enlightenment is, the enlightenment of the Buddha. Many people don't believe it also, right? So they are not aware of it. Then the next thing is they don't know this dependent origination, what it is. They don't know that also. Then they don't know the Four Noble Truths. That is ignorance, the Four Noble Truths. Some people think suffering is happiness, right? So then having wrong views, that's another part of the ignorance. Like thinking the impermanent is permanent, the painful as pleasant. The soullessness is taken as self, that there is a self here. So the impure as pure. Now our body, just think of it. This is, if you go into the body, you will see how impure it is, right? But we take it as very pure. So there are so many other things like that that we take through ignorance. Ignorance is the root of all unwholesome deeds. People do many, many bad deeds, wrongful deeds, because of ignorance, right? Because of the belief in a self, all experiences are considered to be done by me or myself. So because we don't realize that there is no self here, but it is only a process that is going on, the energy process that is going on here, we take everything to be done by me or myself. And that is how we do all these bad things also. We do good things too. But there are many people who do bad things, thinking of, accumulating wealth, for instance. There are many, many ways of doing it. What arises due to ignorance is sankhara. Now, you remember when I first mentioned what the first factor is, I said avidya pachaya sankhara. So now avidya is ignorance. Now we come to the next, link in that factor, sankhara. Now what is sankhara? What arises due to ignorance is sankhara. So now you can see all the things that we do is also sankhara, right? So these activities are both wholesome and unwholesome. These sankharas can be very good things like, being generous, giving help to other people, looking after your parents, looking after relatives, giving things to people. There's so many things that you can do. Wholesome things. There are also unwholesome things, right? So both unwholesome and wholesome are done in three ways. What are the three ways? That is by body, which is called kaya sankhara. Kaya is body. Kaya sankhara. Then speech. That is vachi sankhara. By speech. And then by mind. So these are the three ways in which we do our deeds, actions, right? And they all produce what? Karma. And those kammas are what makes us go into another rebirth after death. Because we have not finished what we had to do to get rid of all this, right? So, sankhara can also mean all things put together, like elements that form our bodies. So, our bodies are also sankhara. Now, you might have heard these words, sankhara pacchaya, sankhara, sabbe sankhara anicca. You must have heard these words. Sabbe sankhara anicca. Also, anicca vata sankhara. There is a verse that we always say when there is a death, anicca vata sankhara. So, that sankhara is not what is meant here in this dependent origination. That means all things that have come about through a cause are sankhara. Sabbe sankhara anicca. Right? Everything that comes because of a cause are impermanent. That is the meaning of that, right? So, now the second link. Now I told you the first link is sabbe sankhara. Avidya pacchaya sankhara. Right? That's the first one. Avidya pacchaya sankhara. Now the word sankhara comes in here like this. Sankhara pacchaya vijnana. Right? Sankhara pacchaya vijnana. Now can you see the effect has become the cause in the second link. I hope you can all see that, right? So now sankhara pacchaya vijnana. Now, what is the meaning of that? Dependent on volitional formations. That is what we talked about, the volitional formations. Consciousness arises. Vijnana is consciousness. So, dependent on our actions, what we have done, wholesome and unwholesome actions, through these three ways, body, mind, and speech. Then what happens? Consciousness arises. And which means consciousness, the conscious life, that is the life that we lead in the present form, in this present birth, is due to the karma done in the previous birth. That is the meaning of that, right? Because we had another birth earlier, this birth has come about due to the karma we did in the previous birth. So, this shows that karma determines where one is reborn, right? Whether we get a good birth, whether we get a human birth, whether we get into a deva world, or whether we get into the animal world, or whatever the world that we get into, depends on what we have done earlier, right? What we do now will help us to get into the next world, right? So because of this idea of the past karma determining the present birth, this consciousness that we have now is called Patisandhi Vijnana. At birth, right? At birth, it is called Patisandhi Vijnana, or relinking consciousness. Relinking consciousness. Now, what is the meaning of that? Because it connects the new existence with the former one as well as the entire past, right? Because of that linking of the past with this life, it is called Patisandhi Vijnana, or relinking consciousness. Therefore, this consciousness is the first factor or conditioning link of the present existence. In this existence, this consciousness is the link to the past that we have brought here. But we must remember that consciousness is also impermanent. That's not permanent, right? And it arises and falls away. Even now you can see that our consciousness does not, it's not one consciousness that goes through our life. It comes and goes according to the situation. The third link. Now we come to the third one, right? So now we have done 2 links. The third one is Vijnana Pachaya Nama Rupam. Can you see? Now Vijnana, the effect in the earlier one becomes the cause in this. Nama Rupa. Nama Rupa comes dependent on the Vijnana. Dependent on consciousness, mentality and materiality arise. Nama Rupa means mentality and materiality. That is the body and the mind. Along with consciousness, right at the moment of conception, in the mother's womb, name and form arises. You see, when the little fetus gets, is fertilized, right? Then at that moment, when the fetus goes into the mother's womb, then immediately consciousness also joins that, right? So if consciousness does not arise, name and form alone cannot develop into a being. And these 2 together help in the functioning of the vital organs like brain and, all the other vital organs in the body. The mentality group is, what is the mentality group? The mind group. That is feeling. One is feeling, Vedana. Perception, Sanya. Volition, Chetana, or thinking, right? And the materiality group is the body made up of the 4 elements. The 4th link is Nama Rupa Pachaya Salayatanam. Now we come to the next group, Salayatana. What are Salayatana? That is dependent on mentality and materiality. The 6-fold base arises. Now what is the 6-fold base? In the tiny one-celled embryo, gradually, now the embryo that has gone into the womb, gradually the 6 sense bases, that is eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind, starts to evolve, right? Together with consciousness, the senses function as eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. So you can see each consciousness is different from the other consciousness according to the sense. Now the 5th link is Salayatana Pachaya Passo. Dependent on the 6-fold base, that is what we have just now discussed, contact arises. Now we see with the eye, we hear with the ear, right? So contact arises. The 6-fold base means the internal senses. When you say 6-fold base, it means the internal ones. That is the ones that we have talked about: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. Then there are the 6 external bases. Now what are those? Those are the objects for the eye. sound for the ear, smell for the nose, taste for the tongue, tactile objects for the body, and mental objects for the mind. These are food for the internal bases, the eye, ear, nose, and so on. The internal bases take the objects as the food. And therefore, they are interrelated. The awareness of the external bases comes only when consciousness joins them. Now, if we just look with the eye and the object only, we will not see it. But consciousness also must come there in order to actually function. The sense must function through these three things: the internal sense base, the external sense base, and consciousness. The awareness of the external bases comes only when consciousness joins them. Now the sixth link is Passa Pacchaya Vedana, which means dependent on contact, feeling arises. So you can see how feeling comes. When the sense organ, its object, and consciousness comes together, feeling arises, and it cannot be stopped. For everyone, there is some kind of feeling. This feeling is also sixfold according to the senses. Whatever the sense that is involved in that feeling, then that is how the senses come in here. It may be pleasurable, painful, or neutral. The feeling can be one of these three things. Feeling may differ due to circumstances and individuals. In reality, it is feeling that experiences an object when it comes in contact with the senses. So, now we come to the seventh link, that is Vedana Pacchaya Tanha. Now, with the feeling comes Tanha. What? Craving. Dependent on feeling arises craving. Craving is said to be threefold. Kama Tanha, craving for sense pleasures. Bhava Tanha, craving for continued existence, to continue again and again in samsara. Then Vibhava Tanha is craving for non-existence. Now these poor people, needy ones, desire happiness and comfort. The rich people do not understand the need of the poor. So they crave for more and more pleasure. While craving can bring unwholesome karma, it can also bring pain, frustration, or even excitement, depending on the circumstances. As beings are attracted to the pleasant, and this is called a thirst, leads to longing and wanting to possess. If one fails in that attempt, it will bring anger and resentment. The Buddha calls it a fire because it's impossible to satisfy beings. The eighth link is Tanha Pacchaya Upadanam. Now, what that means, dependent on craving, arises clinging or grasping. Now, Upadana is fourfold. Now, you can see that the same thing is repeated here too. Kama Upadana, that means sense desire. Then there is Ditti Upadana, that is wrong views. Then third one is Silabbata Upadana, that is attachment to rites and rituals. And the fourth one is Attavada Upadana, that is attachment to a self or soul, believing in a soul that is permanent in this body and mind existence. Clinging and grasping leads to the sense of I and mine. And it may lead to killing and stealing or other evil acts. Sometimes intellectuals find it hard to give up views they have held on to. The most difficult upadana is the belief in a self or soul. The Buddha totally rejected the idea of a soul because everything, including consciousness, changes so fast. And it's not possible to control the body and mind process. Now we come to the ninth link. That is Upadana Pachaya Bhava. Dependent on clinging arises becoming. Becoming is said to be three states of existence in different spheres or realms. That is, in the sensuous sphere. Now, the world, our world is a sensuous sphere. The Deva world is a sensuous sphere. Then there is the form sphere. That is one of the Brahma worlds. Then there is the formless sphere. That's also a Brahma world where there is no form. So these are the ways of becoming, going and, giving birth, getting a rebirth. Then that is one way of becoming. Then also, another idea is that it means, the word becoming means the karma done in the present life, which can bring about rebirth. All right. Now the 10th link is Bhavapachaya Jati, which means dependent on becoming arises birth. This means the conception of a being in a womb. Karma produces the differences in beings, rich, poor, mental deficiencies, physical disabilities, etc. You find different kinds of, variations among human beings too. So all that is due to the way we have our karma. The karma bhava or karmic process of the present life is the energy or power that conditions our future life. The 11th link is Jati Pachya Jara Maranam. Dependent on birth arises aging and death. Aging is the maturing or ripening of the aggregates. The 5 aggregates, I hope you can remember. Form, feeling, perception, and so on, right? As the body and mind gets older, youth disappears. Strength weakens. The limbs refuse to function. Loses memory and mental power. Aging causes suffering as the human being does not like it and fear these changes. But the function of aging is to lead on to death. Death is the natural ending of all things that have arisen. It may happen by the ending of one's merit, finishing one's lifespan, or even due to violence. For those born into any sense sphere, death is the inevitable end, and the wise one will be ready for it when it happens. The next stage is Soka Parideva Dukkha Domanastu Payasa Sambhavanti. All this comes as a result of birth, sorrow of parting from the loved ones, leaving your known habitat, fear of the unknown, regret for things not done, causes grief. Parideva is lamentation, which causes physical suffering in addition to the mental, is seen when someone loses one's dear ones. So the Buddha says, there is this whole mass of suffering. That's how we end the dependent origination. Everything comes to an end like this. Dukkha khandasa samudayo hoti. So, dependent origination shows how human beings are bound by craving and wander in samsara, birth after birth. But by getting rid of these 12 factors, we can liberate ourselves from suffering and rebirth. Now, how do we cease? Now, that is given in another formula like this. So I will just read it out to you. Through the entire cessation of this ignorance, volitional formation ceases. Through the cessation of volitional formations, consciousness ceases. So like that it goes on from each one to the next one. How it ceases, you see. And then the final one is through the cessation of birth, aging and death cease, and sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair. Thus there is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. That is how the cessation is done. So now I hope you have some questions to ask based on what we have just now done. Do you have any questions? Please ask if you have any. Looks like you don't have questions. That means, did you understand? I hope you did. So then in that case, shall we do a little meditation? And I thought today's meditation to, somewhat related to what we have already done now, right? So it is a scan of the body, but with a different perspective, right? So sit comfortably with your back straight and the head in line with the neck and spine, hands on the lap, on your knees. Take a few deep breaths. Now, close your eyes. Now move your attention to the top of your head. Do you have a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling? Or is it a neutral feeling on the top of your head. You might feel the air touching your head. So is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? If there is a pain or even a pleasure, ask yourself, is this head me? Am I this head? Think about it a little. Is this head me? Right, now come down to the face. See the eyes, the lids. Your lids are closed. The eyeballs inside. Look at them in your mind's eye. Look at the lips. Maybe your lips are touching each other. The tongue, saliva in the mouth. Look at them. The nose, the air going in and out. Now, what emotions or feelings do you have regarding this, what you call the face? Are they painful feelings or pleasant feelings or neutral feelings? Do you think of this face as me or mine? Is this face mine? Am I this face? Now go down to your body. See the hands, the feet, the arms, legs. Is there any pain in that part of the body? Or is it comfortable? Or are they bringing any discomfort, those parts of the body? Are they mine? Am I this body? Is this me? Now we have briefly looked at this whole body. Now mindfully go from the toes to the top of the head, part by part, in your mind, go from the toes to the top of the body. Just look at this body and ask yourself, is this me or mine? Am I this body? Is there an I in this body? Slowly open your eyes. Now, friends, if you have any questions about anything, please ask before we close. May all of you be well, happy and peaceful.